ideas. So today we are going to do number 20 and 21. I don't know whether we're going to get to 21. We're going to spend time on 20 and then go from there. As always, the format is that all of us will read our favorite translations of number 20. Anybody who has made their own translation is welcome to read it, and then we are going to discuss it. So that's the plan. If you would like to read your translation, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Evanik.
So number 20, this is from John Mabry, God as Nature Sees God translation. So forget ambitious acquisition of knowledge, and your sorrows will end. How much difference is there between yes and no? What is the distinction between good and evil? Must I value what other values? Nonsense. Having no end to their desires, they're desolate. People rush here and there, maybe going to a feast, or perhaps climbing a tower in the springtime. I alone am calm and unconcerned, like an unself-conscious infant, at peace and having no destination. Most people have more than they need, but I alone seem lost and out of place. I have the mind of a fool, so confused. Ordinary people are bright. I alone seem dim. Ordinary people are discriminating. I alone am ambivalent. As quiet as the ocean, as free as the wind, people rush out on their very important business, but I alone seem incorrigible and uncouth. I am different from ordinary people. I enjoy feeding from the great mother's breasts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Elena, Greg, and Judith. Elena.
Yes. Features of master. When we renounce learning, we have no troubles. The yes is ready and the flattering. Yes. Small is the difference they display. But mark their issues, good and ill. What space the gulf between shall fill. What all men fear is indeed to be feared. But how wide and without end is the range of questions? The multitude of men look dissatisfied and pleased, as if enjoying a full banquet, as if mounted on a tower in spring. I alone seem listless and still, my desires having as yet given no indication of their presence. I am like an infant which has not yet smiled. I look dejected and forlorn, as if I had no home to go to. The multitude of men all have enough and to spare, and I alone seem to have lost everything. My mind is that of a stupid man, and I am in the state of chaos. Ordinary men look bright and intelligent, while I alone seem to be benighted. Benighted? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They look full of discrimination, while I alone am dull and confused. I seem to be carried about as on the sea, drifting, as if I had nowhere to rest. All men have their spheres of action, while I alone seem dull and incapable, like a root borer. And I alone am different from other men, but I value the Tao.
Thank you.
You're
Next
welcome.
up is Greg, Judith, Maritza, and Madeline. Greg.
Okay, this is Ursula Le Guin, and she titles the chapter being different. How much difference between yes and no? What difference between good and bad? What the people fear must be feared. Oh, desolation, not yet, not yet. Has it reached its limit? Everybody's cheerful, cheerful as if at a party, or climbing a tower in springtime, and here I sit, unmoved, clueless, like a child, a baby too young to smile, forlorn, forlorn, like a homeless person. Most people have plenty. I'm the one that's poor, a fool right through. Ignorant, ignorant. Most people are so bright. I'm the one that's dull. Most people are so keen. I don't have the answers. Oh, I'm desolate, at sea, adrift, without harbor. Everybody has something to do. I'm the clumsy one, out of place. I'm the different one. For my food is the milk of the mother. And she has a long, about a page long commentary on this. I probably should save it till later.
No, please go ahead and read the commentary.
Okay. The difference between yes and no, good and bad, is something only the bright people, the people with the answers, can understand. A poor, stupid Taoist can't make it out. This chapter is full of words like huang, which is wild, barren, famine, tong, ignorant, chaotic, hong, dull, turbid, men, sad, puzzled, mute, and who, confused, obscured, vague. They can figure chaos, confusion, a bewilderness in which the mind wanders without certainties, desolate, silent, awkward. But in that milky, dim strangeness lies the way. It can't be found in the superficial order imposed by positive and negative opinions, the good and bad, the yes and no, moralizing that denies fear and ignores mystery.
Thank you, Greg. Next up is Judith, Maritza, and Madeline. Judith.
I'm reading the Stephen Mitchell version. Nobody's read that yet, right?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Stop thinking and end your problems. What difference between yes and no? What difference between success and failure? Must you value what others value? Avoid what others avoid? How ridiculous. Other people are excited as though they were in a parade. I alone don't care. I alone am expressionless, like an infant before it can smile. Other people have what they need. I alone possess nothing. I alone drift about like someone without a home. I am like an idiot. My mind is so empty. Other people are bright. I alone am dark. Other people are sharp. I alone am dull. Other people have a purpose. I alone don't know. I drift like a wave on the ocean. I blow as aimless as the wind. I am different from ordinary people. I drink from the great mother's breasts.
Wonderful. Really like this translation. Next up is going to be Maritza.
My favorite translation is in Spanish, and it's Antonio Rivas. It's the one I read to you guys most often. I'll read it in Spanish and then I will translate it for you guys. Is it better, Shrikant, if I translate paragraph by paragraph or read it all in Spanish and then in English?
Let's do it paragraph by paragraph this time because it is so long.
Very long, right? I was thinking so.
See the way in which Spanish sounds and English sounds side by side. Thank you.
Okay, great. So this one is so Antonio Rivas, he does title his much like Ursula Le Guin does. He calls this one Soledad, which means solitude. No conozco nada y nada me preocupa. No veo diferencia entre sí y no. No veo diferencia entre bien y mal. No temo aquello que la gente teme en la noche. I know nothing and nothing preoccupies me. I don't see the difference between yes and no. I don't see the difference between good and bad. I don't fear that which people fear of the night. La gente está feliz como una fiesta suntuosa o jugando en el campo en primavera, pero yo permanezco tranquilo y vanagloriando como un recién nacido antes de aprender a sonreír, solitario, sin hogar. The people are happy as they would be at a sumptuous feast or playing in the camp in the spring. But I remain tranquil and let's see, vagabundo is, I'm sorry, the translation, I'm like with no home. I remain tranquil and with no real direction. Like a recently born before learning to smile. Solitary without a home. La gente tiene la gente tiene lo suficiente para compartir, pero yo no poseo nada y mi corazón es ignorante, turbio y ensombrecido. The people have enough and enough to eat, but I have nothing, and my heart is ignorant, turbulent, and in the shadow. La gente está radiante y segura, mientras yo sigo ciego y confuso. La gente es inteligente y sabia, mientras permanezco torpe e ignorante, sin objetivo, como una ola en la superficie del mar, sujeto a nada. The people are radiant and secure, while I remain blind and confused. The people are intelligent and knowledgeable, while I remain dumb and ignorant, without objective, like a wave on the surface of the ocean, subject to nothing. La gente está ocupada con su propósito, mientras sigo impráctico y tosco. Estoy aparte del resto de la gente, todavía sostenido por la naturaleza. The people are occupied with their purposes, while I remain impractical and I guess like rough-hued. I am apart from the rest of the people, still sustained by nature. Thanks.
Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate that. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, if you could read in Chinese.
Yes, thank you. In this chapter, we have debate the one first sentence go first or last. I'm going to let's see read the last sentence from the 绝学无忧，微之与阿，相去几何，善之与恶。相去若何？人之所谓不可不畏。荒兮其未央哉！众人熙熙，如享太牢。如冲登台，吾独泊兮其未兆。如婴儿之未孩，累累兮若无所归。众人皆有余，而我独若遗。我愚人之心也哉！动动兮，孰能昭昭？我独轰轰，孰能察察？我独蒙蒙，大兮其若海。恍兮若无子，众人皆有矣，而我独顽是彼。我独异于人，故贵师母。And
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Margarita. Madeline.
The version that I have is by Jiafu Feng and Jane English. It sounds very much as if it were written by a moody teenager, so I'm going to give it a little bit of emphasis. Give up learning and put an end to your troubles. Is there a difference between yes and no? Is there a difference between good and evil? Must I fear what others fear? What nonsense! Other people are contented, enjoying the sacrificial feast of the ox. In spring, some go to the park and climb the terrace, but I alone am drifting, not knowing where I am. Like a newborn babe before it learns to smile, I am alone, without a place to go. Others have more than they need, but I alone have nothing. I am a fool. Oh yes, I am confused. Other men are clear and bright, but I alone am dim and weak. Other men are sharp and clever, but I alone am dull and stupid. Oh, I drift like the waves of the sea, without direction, like the restless wind. Everyone else is busy, but I alone am aimless and depressed. I am different. I am nourished by the Great Mother.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice reading. Next up is Margarita.
Hi, good morning from Melbourne. I will read from Bahasa Indonesia. So I think the translation pretty much the same. I'm just going to read Bahasa and what the sentence they give at the end. So, tidak belajar pun tidak ada kesulitannya. Seberapakah perbedaan antara yang pintar dan yang bodoh? Apakah perbedaan antara kebaikan dan keburukan? Yang disegani orang lain tidak dapat untuk disegani. Sulit untuk mengetahui peristiwa-peristiwa yang belum terjadi. Banyak orang terlena, hanyut dalam arus kemewahan seperti tak henti-hentinya berpesta daging lembu di atas paseban dan menikmati pemandangan musim semi. Melainkan hanya aku sendiri dalam keadaan tenang, tiada keinginan, bagaikan anak kecil yang belum cukup tahu usianya. Bagaikan anak piatu yang bergelandangan tidak punya rumah untuk pulang. Banyak orang memiliki harta berlebihan, sedangkan aku sendirian bagaikan kehilangan segala-galanya. Aku bagaikan seorang dungu yang tidak memiliki pikiran suatu apa, dengan pakaian compang-camping tidak menentu. Kebanyakan orang hidup mewah dan bergelimang harta, sedangkan aku sendiri tampak suram dan menjemukan. Umumnya orang bergembira dengan muka terang dan berseri-seri, sedangkan aku sendiri dalam keadaan kusut, lesu, dan sepi. Akan tetapi aku senantiasa tenang bagai lautan yang teduh, senantiasa bertiup kian kemari bagai hembusan angin. Banyak orang memiliki kemampuan, sedangkan aku sendiri hanya memiliki kebodohan. Hanya aku sendiri yang sangat berbeda dengan orang lain dan tidak terpisah dari dukungan Dao, bagaikan bayi yang tidak dapat berpisah dari ibu. So that's it. And they try to make a conclusion like to be away from worldly matters and to become one with Dao.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Margarita. That was delightful. I just really like all these different sounds and how, because what happens is that this is poetry. So poetry, there is like a music to the sound itself, and each of the language has its own beauty to it. So it's wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Jason. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I heard. This is a long, so I'm going to share my screen, and then if I'm not, because it's long, so if not clear or you have a question, please interrupt me. You know, instead of if there's something not clear, because I find out that this one is very long. So
so folks, if you have a question, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. Okay.
Okay, so please call. Just please ask question, because this one is very long and I'm afraid, you know, probably, you know, I
Sure.
lost the track. So first, the first sentence, remember last week, okay? So 绝学 we use word by word translation is cease learning, stop worrying, okay? So that's why I insist this sentence should belong to the previous section, okay? Because it doesn't fit in this one, because just like I think it's Marisa's translation called solitude, right? This one is solitude. Lao Tzu is not teacher. This one is a confession. So you can imagine, let's say people in the 55 years old, he's resigned from the company executive, okay, just quit. And he doesn't like the busy business world. He thinks that's nonsense. So he leave, okay? So instead of teaching, his confession, he talk about how his mood. That's why I want to remove the first line, because the rest is a confession. He talked to himself, okay? So these words, if you pay on the Chinese character, you will see a lot of words are double. For example, you will see these two words, the same words twice, right? So many same words twice, okay? Repeat the same word. That's common in Chinese, but I think it starts from the southern part of China. So the language is a little bit different. Instead of like, remember before we had like a forward, okay? So right now become like a song or something like, so he probably speaks in local dialect, okay, confession. So let's just start it, okay? What is the difference between yes sir and the yeah? What is the difference between good and the evil? I think everybody probably get it the same way, okay? And because I think who's translating talk about only smart people can tell the difference, but I think most of people, most of translators talk about what's the big deal between yes sir and the yeah, okay? What's the big difference between good and evil? So he doesn't care. That's in my view. Okay, then this one is a little bit tricky. Okay, I put a question mark here. Remember, the Chinese writing has no punctuation, so we don't know. Okay, he said, must I feel what others feel? Is a question mark or not? Okay, so I think most of the translation, I think 50% put a question mark on that. So he asked himself a question, whether or not I should afraid of other people afraid. So his answer, so this one, Huang Xi, okay, some translations say that's grand, big area, okay, so it's boundless, okay, and I disagree because this is a question. According to the Taoism teacher, he has his own standards, so you are not going to afraid what other people are afraid. So he asks a question. So this Huang Xi should means answer, ridiculous, nonsense, okay? I will never do this, okay? I think that's my interpretation. And this word, Huang, means the wild area, okay? Big wild area. That's why a lot of people, including a lot of Chinese scholars, will consider this one as a grand area. So it's how open it is, okay? Boundless area. But I will say this one because this word also being used as ridiculous, because you think about it, in the wild area, it's also a weird area. So in Chinese, this word, other than doing the open wild, also considered as ridiculous. So I will take the word as ridiculous. So that's a little bit different there. And the rest of them, probably we all do the same thing. I highlight the green and the red. That's a contraction, right? So the green one is other people doing something. Then I'm doing something. So he's going to, from now on, he's going to contract two different situations. So everyone has a great time, as if they were enjoying a feast, or as if they were visiting the terrace in the spring. Okay. And he talked about himself. I alone stay quiet and have no future plans. I'm opaque like a baby without a voice. I wander about like I have no place to go. Continue. Everyone has enough to spare. I alone seem to be at a loss. Then he talked about his heart. My heart like a fool's. Most people appear bright. but I alone appear dusty. I'm translated words by words, this Zao Zao and Hun Hun. Okay, so if you know Chinese, you probably know these two words means bright, and these two words means dark, sleepy. Okay, and now most people observe outward, but I alone observe within. Okay, this one will be very different from most of people's translation because I translate word by word. Because cha cha, most translation talk about smart because cha means you look outward. Okay, men means you are not in a good mood. Okay, but the original meaning, if you know Chinese, you see the door here. There's a door. That means the door closed. You are not going out. So I think this one is a good contrast. Talk about outside looking, and they talk about your internal feeling. He's different compared to other people. Then he has another statement. I feel wavy and calm like the open ocean. I feel unlimited and endless like the strong wind. They all have their own goals, but I alone will remain unsophisticated. So the last sentence, I alone am different from them. I value being fed by my mother. So basically, he's talking about after he retired, he is going to be like a child, go back to his original. So the word in Chinese is, this word means eat. Okay, this word means mother, literally. Okay, so that means it's going to be fed by the mother. Okay, so some translation call it because it's a mother, so must represent Dao. That's the extension. So I just want to say one more time that my translation basics is without my own interpretation, I try to figure out what's the original meaning. So when you read it, you should have your own interpretation. So that's all I have to say on this one. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. All right, folks. So now the next step is for us, because this is actually a very beautiful, very deep poem or chapter. So I would like to hear what everybody has, thinks about the chapter. What we'll do is I will do it in stages. So first, just give your impressions of the chapter. Take your time. If you have any questions, what we'll do is that we will take the question. I'll keep track of all the questions. Don't try to answer people's questions at this stage. Let's go ahead and hear what people got from this chapter. Okay, and then we will go ahead, collect all the questions. You can ask questions at, immediately after that, we'll do a Q&A on that. We'll try to get all the questions and we'll try to answer all the questions. First up is going to be Amon. Amon, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that doing this translation with Jason was a great deal of fun, and this chapter in particular, a great deal of challenge. It is really a difficult one, probably as much as any other I think we've encountered, to take the literal translation and render it into clear English ideas. But specifically, I wanted to point to what he was saying about that line towards the end that says outward versus inward, men being the inward. He talked a little bit about the etymology of the figure for inward, which he said are doors, and he's correct. They're doors there, but they're doors enclosing a heart, which I always found to be a fascinating rendering or way of expressing inward, closing the doors upon one's shin or one's heart. Yeah, I just had to highlight that particular point, and I think he did a masterful job in this translation. Mostly it was just spitting and polishing and throwing out ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. All right, so now we're talking about what we got from this chapter. So it's going to be Laura followed by Elena. Laura, what did you get from this chapter?
Well, for some reason, I felt that this chapter was the most deliberate and transparent in a way in his writing. I mean, I felt really much that he had felt he didn't, he had everything given to him by the Great Mother, that he didn't really need anything more than she had given, so that he could live with less than everyone and be an outsider and be safe in this life and feel confident that he had, he would be brought to the right place. And that's what I got from the reading of this. So that's how I felt about this chapter in particular. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. That was wonderful. Elena, what did you get from this chapter?
I think, and thank you so much. This is exactly, it's very deep, and there's lots of points that are just incredible. And one of them, I'll just bring up a question.
Let's do questions at the end.
Okay.
We'll right now
I'll
just try to put
on the
what we
impression.
got from it. Yeah.
Impression. Okay. That is, it's to me, it's surrendering.
Elena, your sound is going in and out.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. To me, it's so much about surrendering and observing and just being present. That's what it is. And then I will ask question when I can, please.
Yes. Next up is going to be Evanique, Maritza, and Phil. Evanique.
Yeah, when I first read this, and second probably time too, I was having problems with it, and then I heard other people's translations, and I was like, okay. So when they were talking about Stephen Mitchell, the first thing he says is stop thinking, and I was like, that's what I'm doing wrong. I'm thinking way too much about this. And then when with Maritza's translation, it reminded me of the series we're doing on flow, and how you're just supposed to just kind of let things go through. And then this is when it was like, oh, this chapter is for me, because this chapter is for overthinkers. And if you overthink this chapter, you fall into a trap of your own mind. So I think I was thinking about it, and it was like, and I was thinking like thinking is thoughts that we dwell on. So if I stop dwelling on the thoughts and just let them flow, then it makes sense. It's just, and then when Jason was like, when he started translating, he was like, one of the things is stop worrying. It is like, oh, okay. So it all like kind of clicked when you heard other people. And it occurred to me that this is kind of, I would say like, kind of like Woodstock, like 60s era, where everything is just free. Like we were always looking for direction. You're always looking for like, what are you going to do with your life? And in the 60s in Woodstock, they were kind of just like, we're just going to figure it out. It's not, we're not going to overthink it. And then I was like, that was it. And then all of a sudden, Aman started talking about the doors that close into the heart. And I was like, that to me is what brought it all together, because it's like, when you start overthinking and you start thinking about different things, you close the doors of your heart. You just don't allow it to flow, and you started trying to control it. So I think in summation, this chapter is like, stop trying to control everything, stop trying to overthink it, and just kind of let things flow. So those were my random thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Maritza, Phil, and Kate. Maritza.
So in the Spanish version, the very first line is, I know nothing and nothing worries me. I find it interesting that it's, so Jason's version, and I think one or two others, it says, don't worry. And just the slight difference there of the imperative versus the personal, I find it to be really interesting, because they're painting different pictures, but kind of to the same end. Like, it brought home for me the idea that, oh, this poem is my inner self talking to myself, because it's not as obvious from the Spanish version that it's my inner self speaking. But when you look at it from the English, it's saying cease learning, no more worries. And it's like, oh, wait, this is what I'm saying to myself. And so, rereading it with the view that this is kind of it's a internal pep talk. This poem kind of like strikes a note within me, because it seems to be on some level telling you to forgive yourself for being different, or forgive yourself for wanting to strike apart from the social norm, as it were. And then it also seems to like make it, and I personally love the way the Spanish one ends, like, because it's saying that he's still, or I'm reminding myself that I'm still sustained by nature. And I just really like that, because it's a grounding, like all throughout all the previous poems, I see the theme there. And it's it seems like it's a pep talk where you're reminding yourself of the things that aren't that important. So yes, you're pointing out that you may not see the difference between yes or no, or, everyone else is happy and unpreoccupied, but you're just calm and still. But it's like it pivots. The poem says these things that in a different context could be construed as negatives of the self. But as you go reading the poem, it's phrased in a way that makes it okay and makes it seem the natural buildup towards finding yourself sustained by nature is this rejection or separation from those trappings of society that could potentially lead you astray. And it's like, it's not that they're fully negative aspects, it's just that all the things that are pointed out here are things that any one of them we can get lost in. And it's kind of it's the hints of, all things in moderation. And I love what Evanique said, this thing where it's also reminding you to just flow along, and pointing out all of these social things that we can and possibly sometimes are separating ourselves from. It's a gentle reminder that you do need a little distance from these things in order to truly flow and, find the path forward. So I found it to be very just striking. It really felt like it was just striking to me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Next up is going to be Phil and Kate and Judith. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Marissa, because your thing about solitude and Jason's explanation about opening your heart helped me to go into a different level of understanding of this. I, however, am not gonna, like everybody else, other people is not gonna throw the intellect under the bus. What he's saying is, if you go into 100 years of solitude, you will find a deeper understanding of the intellect and the mind, because you will begin to feel the anxiety that it is somehow incomplete because you're trapped within your mind. And this sort of solitude of contemplation, and Jason called it confession. I'm not sure if I want to call it confession, but a deep penetration of the mind allows you to find a connection between the mind and the heart that allows the mind to have a deeper understanding of the deep relationship that the two has to be complementary in and attune to itself in order to understand a deeper level of understanding of what the Tao is. Because the mind itself cannot contemplate that, cannot feel that. And so it needs the heart to implement that other tune, the other melody that allows it to harmonize with the Tao. Because the problem with the mind, and possibly the heart too, to a certain degree, without working them in tandem, is that there's always a problem between the finite contemplating the infinite. That is that's a natural dissonance that you need to, in a sense, put the two together to create a harmony that, in a sense, could begin to sense a feeling, a harmony with the Tao. And I think that is the important thing. And that could only happen if you withdraw at a certain period. So you have this long period of solitude to, in a sense, penetrate beyond the mere understanding in order to get in tune with the Tao, because we are all manifested in the manifestation of the Tao. We are not the Tao. So all you can never really understand it. You could only be attuned with it, and the heart is going to allow you to make that step and at least reach toward the Tao. You're not going to be at the Tao, but you're going to reach to the Tao.
Wonderfully put. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Kate, Judith, Mike, and Greg. Kate.
Hi, Shrikang. First of all, I want to just thank you for giving us the different translations, because I've had a really hard time getting a copy here. And so that was wonderful.
This is wonderful to see people from Indonesia and from New Zealand showing up. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to say that I enjoyed Phil's translation the most because I really felt it had the least interpretation. I think that was, it really felt the purest. And my feeling about the Dao De Jing is that he's trying to describe living as a soul. He's trying to describe the soul experience. And so it's all in the very first chapter. And in this chapter, he's describing himself in relation to it. And in the different translations, I heard self-deformation, prescriptive behavior, all kinds of, that yes and no are, there is no difference. And I don't think he said any of those things. I think he was attempting to describe what it is to be a soul in a physical body. And if you're lucky, you get a glimpse of it, and it's difficult to maintain, and it's impossible to describe. So I think he did a good job of describing it, and none of the translations are pure.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Judith, followed by Mike and Greg. Judith.
I'm enjoying this chapter more. The more that we talk, the more I'm enjoying it. So I liked Elena's word of surrender. That kind of captured it for me as well. And to me, it kind of feels like, when he talks about the difference between success and failure, or yes and no, or having a purpose and not having a purpose. It's kind of like it's such a human thing, uniquely human thing, to always want to do, pursue, control, create, and whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, we spend all our time doing that kind of thing. So it's kind of a reminder to take us back to what we are, what's common with ourselves and nature, a reminder that we are part of nature, and that there is this place where those things are not, those things that we put so much emphasis on aren't everything. This place where we can reconnect with, what makes us common with the rest of nature, which isn't always changing and doing and creating. So it's just a kind of like a balance, a reminder to balance. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Mike.
I was reading from the Wayne Dyer translation, and to my knowledge, number 20 is the longest in the book. I think number 67 also is pretty long. And what I found interesting was most of the verse here, it's Lao Tzu separating himself from the world that he's in. Almost every paragraph and verse seems to separate in one way or another. And to Phil's point, if you want to find a deeper understanding, if what that takes is solitude, this kind of hit me almost a little foreshadowing or a warning that if you are going to do that, you're going to separate yourself a little bit from society or from loved ones. You know, for example, if you're a social drinker, for example, and you say, I'm not going to drink, that's it, I don't drink anymore. Sometimes amongst your friends, there's a little disconnect. You have people who are used to seeing you have a glass of wine with dinner, and now you're not having that glass of wine. And every now and then it creates a little friction. So what I found from this is that taking the path of solitude does come at a small price, that you will be separated a bit from how you view society in general.
Wonderful. When I read this, my favorite translation is Ursula Le Guin, and she names all the chapters. And though I love her translations, I generally don't like the names that she uses. So I renamed all of the poems. And my name for this poem is Poor Baby Dao, because this is, to me, is nature and culture. What he's saying is that everybody has culture. Everybody has mastered culture and is doing very well with it. They are occupied, they have possessions, they have purpose, they are bright, they have knowledge. And I am a child of nature, and I don't have any of those things. So that I see that as being the theme, kind of nature and culture. So next up is going to be Amon, followed by Greg. Amon.
Yeah, I actually kind of want to ride on the coattails of what you were just saying, Shrikant, and what Michael, what you were saying before, and leading back to Phil, this idea of solitude, of understanding the Tao through self-introspection and removing yourself from society. My Sifu always said, to get your PhD in Taoism, you needed to go and live on the mountain for at least a good 10 years. And usually after you did that, you'd come down, see the world around you and go, oh, they've messed all this up, and go back up into the mountain and live there for another 20. And I'm sure Jason, I'm sure Kevin, anyone who's inculcated into Chinese society has heard, stories of old men in the mountains, because they're there. Those hermits still persist in that pursuit of obtaining that PhD, because the Tao is not something that you can learn through a book or even with just a teacher, or one has to go and live it. And that really is become the quintessential characteristic of Taoists in action. I will say that you were talking about sort of titling this chapter, and I was thinking about and our impressions. And as I've been listening to this, I think more than solitude, and all respect to Jason, I do think there's a confession here, but I think the theme, if there's one, is relinquishing, letting go of. If you sort of read this in, I believe it was Madeline, you gave it the plaintive teenage tone of, everyone has stuff and I alone am dull, and you can read it in that plaintive tone or that poor baby tone, but it's trying to own that as not a complaint, not a lament, as this is something to strive for. This is something that is virtuous for me to do, because it will actually get me to that point of synchronizing, harmonizing, communing with the Tao. And so it's very interesting listening to all these interpretations, but I think they're all cycling around very similar ideas of relinquishing what you think you ought to want and recognizing what you believe you truly want.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is going to be Greg, followed by Kevin. Greg.
I appreciate very much what Amon just said, and I will continue the disagreement with Srikanth. What I'm going to talk about is the title that Ursula Le Guin gives to this, Being Different. That's the title she uses. And I feel that this is allowed to talking over 3 millennia to modern man. We are so differentiated. It's like hyped up differentiation. We're doom scrolling through Facebook all the time. We're getting into little tiny cliques all the time. And he is the same. Whatever happens, he is always the same. There's no difference. Nothing happens. He just is with the wind. He's just with nature. He's not different. It's us that have to differentiate ourselves.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Next up is going to be Kevin, and then we are going to have everybody put down the best question that they have. You can ask all the best question that you have about this chapter. We'll organize all the questions, and then everybody gets to answer all the questions. So if anybody, I'm going to give priority to people who want to give their takeaways. So first it's going to be Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I like words. Last 2 words, 师母, in Chinese. The first word, 师, Jason translated fate, is a direct translation. Basically, fed a baby. Who fed a baby? Normally mother. So here for me, the mu, which is the mother, the great mother is an analogy of Dao. And the 师母 is together. I would say that's the whole, you kind of understand, that's a, could be come up, my question would be, who is your great mother? The Dao. For yourself. Mother, definitely, or father, and maybe God, or nature, or nurtured by yourself, or your own, is your Dao, or you pursue Dao. It's keep learning. That's one thing here, and why he allowed to claim himself baby. It's open mind, never end. Everything, every moment is a new beginning. And so that's why he considered the Dao is great mother. They keep learning from the great mother Dao. Could be nature or something else. That's my question, by the way, for who is your great Dao?
Who's your mother? Very good.
Who's your mother? Yes.
Okay. So folks, Patricia or Andrew, would you like to talk about your takeaways, or would you have a question? Patricia.
My takeaway, I guess, would be that I would be concerned if I was reading this like in the here and now, I would be concerned that this individual is having some kind of existential dilemma, and that there's like a melancholy feeling of loneliness that he's bordering on, whether it's, you know, then it goes into solitude. But I was thinking of the Leonard, I think it's Leonard Cohen. He wrote a song, and one of the lyrics was, when you're not feeling holy, your loneliness says that you've sinned. And I think that like in my version, the piece about the baby is, I alone remain uncommitted, like an infant who has yet smiled. but I was listening to Jason and reading what he wrote, and it said the baby without a voice. Well, those two images to me, first of all, they took my breath away, because I didn't feel empowered by that. I felt like not only relinquished, but empty. And it wasn't until the very end of the poem that I was able to integrate the contemplation of, well, where do I connect? What am I connected to? And the connection with nature, then there was, some kind of air. Because when I'm reading it, I'm losing more and more energy as I'm reading it. The polarity, of who am I, and also the naming of it, as solitude. This to me has more melancholy feeling than solitude. So I was just wondering if that might be an aspect of what Michael was saying about becoming less and less connected to society.
Okay, very good. So I'll put that question as, is this melancholic or not? Andrew, do you have a takeaway or do you have a question?
I have a takeaway.
Go ahead.
So I think I'm more along, I'm thinking more along the lines of Jason, Michael, and Patricia, and that I don't see a message here. This sounds to me like he's voicing his state of mind, and there's some, and in fact there's some, it's melancholy in that he's essentially describing or pointing out things that he doesn't have by taking the course that he's taken, which is more about not assigning value to material things, looking inward, taking this more spiritual path. And clearly he's missing out on some things, and he's stating quite explicitly. And to me, it's just, it's a good, so there's no message. I don't see a message here, but the learning, I think, is, what, there's something to be said about our perspective as humans who view the material world and assign value to things and feel like there's purpose to things. And if you put all that aside and just think that to be pure is to almost be absent of, have an absence of all human feelings, and you're going to feel empty, accept the fact, try to become the ideal human. Don't try to become, this is my take, don't try to become the ideal nothingness. I think there's a sense that all of these the ideal spiritual state is to not embody your humanity, your humanness at all. And I think when people interpret these things, they kind of they go towards that side, thinking that that's the deeper meaning.
Wonderful. Do you want to phrase that as a question in terms of the way in which people interpret this? And I think it's a profound question. And I think people will have different answers to it. So are you saying that, is this projecting an ideal human or kind of a withdrawal from it? Is that what you're asking? If you had to put it as a question? How about you think about it, and if you can come up with a question. I like your commentary, but I want to put it as a question so people can actually focus their mind and give answers.
Okay.
All right.
I'll type it in. How about that?
Sounds good. So folks,
would the question be, is it a warning?
Let him think about it.
Yeah.
Let him formulate. He has a very complex position that he's been making over the last 3 or 4 different episodes. So if he can put it as a question, then people will be able to consider it and give answers, their own answers to it. Thank you. Next up, it's going to be only questions now, folks. What questions do you have about this chapter? Try to be brief. I'm going to collect all the questions. Don't try to answer them. just collect all the questions, and then everybody gets to answer the questions. Phil, you have a question?
I'm not sure if it's a question. It is a question to me. Okay.
So go ahead and phrase it as a question, and then we'll have everybody answer it.
Well, in a way, I can't. I can't because it needs a little bit of background.
Please do.
And really it has to do with the last line. Somebody has mentioned who's the mother, right? Who's the nourishing mother? And I seem to believe that there's two things, because you can never get at the Tao. You can only, in a sense, harmonize with the manifestation of the Tao. Okay. It is the mother symbolized in through nature, you reach the Tao and the mother is the one that provides you the path to it? Or is the mother a symbol of returning to the womb? Because you can look at it psychologically as well, right? Because if it's returning to the womb, it seems like a kind of nostalgia rather than a progression. I mean, that's a very, very important question to me, because like, yes,
Sure.
we all like to return to the oneness of
So
everything.
what I will do, Phil, is that I will put that as a continuation of Kevin's question. You know, who is your mother, and in what sense is that your mother? Next up is questions from Laura and Amon. Laura, what's your question?
Well, mine's a little off the track, but I was reading Louis Sullivan again.
Oh, no, let's
contrast to this.
Okay,
because
just be brief. That's it.
I felt that's his autobiography was the presence of this poem, and it made it come alive reading his passage. So I don't know how to phrase this question exactly, but do you see through Louis Sullivan's real life the essence of this poem?
No, I agree with you. The thing is that people here do not have, most people would have not attended it. So it would be very difficult for people to actually formulate. I clearly see Louis Sullivan as being, as a good expression of this way of thinking of kind of nature and culture, and this dance between nature and culture, how you have to go between them. But it's not, there isn't enough context for people to answer this question. So let me go to the next one. Amon, would you like to put a question on the table?
Just a brief one. Sort of pulling together two threads that I'm hearing throughout this. Is it possible that this is a intentional synthesis of melancholy and aspiration in a single encapsulated chapter?
Wonderful.
That those two tones could live side by side in absolute truth.
So melancholy and aspiration, very good. Okay, next up, give me a second here. All right, next up are questions from Evanique, Madeline, and Mike. Evanique.
Yeah, so my question was going to what Amon said earlier, and he was talking about the living the Tao. And so my question is, how do we live the Tao?
Wonderful. How do we live the Tao? Excellent. Next up is Madeline. Madeline, what's your question?
My question is for the Chinese readers here. If you could explain to us, there's the baby at the center of the poem and the mother at the end. And the translations of the baby at the center, none of them had the word that Jason used, which was opaque. And so I was very curious about that. So that's one question. And the other question, the second question is the word mother at the end. Does that mean just a regular mother, or does it have some component of the same character that's used for yin? And then the third question is, are these two baby and mother characters ones that would be used together in ordinary language, or are they things that aren't usually paired?
Very good. Paired. All right. I will have to figure out how to put them all together. I'll do so. Thank you. Next up is Mike, followed by Elena. Mike.
My question is, can your personal interpretation change from week to week based on your current state of mind?
Wonderful. Does your interpretation change from week to week? Excellent. Next up is Elena.
Right. My question is how to cease learning
and quit governing. And it's I get governing from the Chinese translation, which is really beautiful. Do not govern, stop governing. Thank you.
No, sorry. Parts of what your question was were lost in audio. Can you repeat, please?
Yes. How to stop learning, cease learning, and quit governing. And the governing comes from Chinese translation, which is so beautiful. Do not govern or stop governing. Thank you.
Very good. Let's see. And we got Andrew's question, what price to pay for seeking oneness with the Tao? Kevin, you have another question. Go ahead.
I got a question, Sven, can you kind of help me rephrase? What are the challenges if you live the lifestyle Lao Tzu described in this chapter?
Wonderful. What are the challenges with this lifestyle? Excellent. Okay. All right. So this is live the Tao. This one I'm going to move. This one I'm going to move at the end. Okay. All right. I think let's start with Kevin's question. In the last line, who is your mother? And what is the mother like? So it's a combination of Kevin's question and Phil's question. If you'd like to answer it, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Only answers at this point. Okay, we are just answering this particular question. And then we're going to take different questions. I'm going to organize them in kind of more general questions first, and then more specific questions. So it's going to be Marissa, Jason, Evanique, and Laura. Marissa.
I believe that the Spanish poem tells us, you know, the mother is nature, and by extrapolation, the way, and by further extrapolation, the Tao, because all of those are interconnected, as we've seen in the previous poems.
Thank you. Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, I tend to not to extend too much to think about mother as Tao or whatever. I was kind of forced myself to think about mother as mother, okay, which is where you are coming from. Okay, so you are going to be fed, be nurtured by what you are original coming from. So that was the way I was thinking, you know.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Evanique, followed by Laura. Evanique.
Yeah, I think I have a different interpretation of the mother. I think the mother is who you've experienced as a mom. So if you experience the mother as a nurturer, that's who she is. Now, if your mother is distant, you may view the mother here as distant if you're talking about who the mother is. And it's the same way, like sometimes in Christianity, you know, they say, you know, you mimic the father. If the father in your life is absent, you view God as absent. If the father in your life is critical, you view God as a punitive God and a critical God. So I think the mother is, I don't know if the mother so much nature as it is who you interpret a mother to be like, based on your experience.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Laura, Phil. Laura, go ahead.
I think that it's maybe that the mother is the closest thing that to the Tao, not exactly the Tao, but the closest being to the Tao.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Phil.
I think the mother, in a funny way, is the empty vessel in which you have to put together a new image of the synthesis between previous understanding of what mother is.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Andrew, Judith, Kevin, and Kate. Andrew. Andrew, you need to unmute yourself.
So in this case, the way it's used, I see it as just referencing the mother in the physical sense, that is in the physical, the material world. That is the life that sustains us as humans, you know, because it comes right after he talks, he mentions that whatever, I am alone, and some other phrase that he uses to describe his current physical state. So it's just about, I'm here and I'm living off of this earth, this nature, and ultimately that's all I'm doing. So I think it's purely physical.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Judith, Kevin, Kate, and Jason. Judith.
Oh, I'm so confused. I mean, like, I don't know that I understand, but I think that it is the Tao, that it's the that source. The whole idea of the infant is that is what you were before you adopted things and made them into your being. You know, you made them parts of what you show and are. Not that that's negative in any way. I don't think he's saying that this poem is saying that's negative. It's just saying that the mother or the Tao, that source of energy, nature, that's why I'm confused, like nature, all of that before, when you were an infant, before you established identity and all of that, that's the source that you have to still draw from.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is Kevin, followed by Kate. Kevin.
Yes, I understand it this way. It's very simple, maybe a naive. Body average is 60%. It's made from water and other element also. So that's how, let's say from our mother, let's see how birds for with me, then where mom come from. The same thing eventually come to from nature. We lived long enough, 100 years, then we back to nature, earth again. So that's the big, obviously, we don't need to complicate it. We don't need, also don't want to simplify, also give some space. You talk about a physical world. So no different, we you know, the stone or the tree, a bird, all made of a similar thing, all from earth for this case. So it could be the nature. Nature, he's not going to, where's nature come from? Where's water? Why is it coming to here? They made it. So that's could be though. That's mean we hard to explain. We're going deep, so no answer. We're still learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Kate, Jason, Marco, and Katie. Kate.
I'm thinking that it's different than nature in the because of the reference to the baby. It's like the I will be provided for. So I'm not responsible for creating my own sustenance, my own wealth, whatever. It will come to me in whatever shape it comes to me. And that is the mother nurturing. So it's the source of nourishment, I guess, would be the best way to sum it up. Yeah.
Thank you. Next up is Jason.
Yeah, I forgot to mention. Okay, so I just do a quick search on the Dao De Jing. Lao Tzu used mu 7 times in the whole chapter, in the whole book. if you recall the first one, okay, they all use as a source, okay, just the mother, the origin. If you remember on the very first chapter, the Dao can be said is the Dao, this one, it talk about the name is the mother of everything. So the translation usually talk about the source of everything. But this one, because it's fed by mother, so a lot of things translate as a mother, as a Dao. So I think if we based on the text, it should be the source. If you read the first chapter, it means source, and the word is mother, same word.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. Next up is Marco, followed by Katie. Marco. Marco, you need to unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if basically it's this non-attachment to like the material world. So if he doesn't get his attachment from he doesn't get his nourishment from the material world, but he gets his nourishment from the mother's milk, which is the Tao.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Katie.
Yeah, I think the Clatfelter translation says, I take my sustenance only from the great unknown. So I think he's trying to stress the Jason's comment about the source and the Tao, rather than getting, so I think that would be more evidence for that.
Thank you. Let me follow up just a second. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, okay, I'm starting to see what we discussed last week, that the first line in this poem, give up learning and put an end to your troubles.
Madeline, we are just asking the question, who is the mother described in the last line?
Right.
Go ahead.
So when read as one poem, this number 20 is really sort of the consequence of what happens when you give up sainthood and renounce wisdom, and at the very end you return to the source.
Got it. Very good. I want to follow up on your question. So Jason, Kevin, or Amon, anybody who is familiar with the words used in the last line, the baby and the mother, is this a common phrase that is used in Chinese? Is this so can you talk a little bit about that? Let's start with Jason.
Yeah, I like to talk about this. It's common to talk mother and the son together, and I think in chapter 52 you talk about mother and the son, but the compare usually is mother and the son use the word 子, like 老子, 子, that means son. But here I don't, at least that's my opinion, I don't see that has a relation with the mother, because Lao Tzu doesn't use the word 子 when he said baby. Okay, the literal word 婴儿, that means the newborn baby. And the reason he used baby is the focus is not baby. The point is the baby doesn't speak. So Lao Tzu is talking about his that retirement, relinquished situation, state of mind. He is nothing to say, just like baby. The words 为该 that words means the baby, the baby when they want to make a voice, right? But cannot make it. Still like, so he's describing this situation. So I think if we try to connect this baby with mother, I think we are over explanation. So basically the talk about baby, his point is not speaking. And the mother basically is talking about the source. Okay.
Thank you. Next, we're going to take the question of Amon. Amon, go ahead.
Just as it was being discussed, it got me thinking a little bit. You asked more generally, is mother and son sort of a common refrain, or mother and child? And it's so common as to be overthought. The word hao, which is part of like ni hao, hello, or you good, or hao hao, good. Hao is made up of the characters of a mother and child, and it is I often said that, you know, the word happy, HAPPY, is a vagary. It's totally ambiguous, and so in the Western English we tend to impart many different meanings to it. Good is very concrete within the Chinese lexicon. It is a mother and child, and that stands in the center of goodness to be measured against. So yeah, it's so ubiquitous there, it's almost overlooked. But
Wow.
yeah, it's not those terms that are being used here in this poem. He's using different language, yingar and you know, mu, for a description of mother and of an infant.
Thank you, Jason. That's very useful. Thanks. Not Jason, sorry, Amon. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, what do you think about these phrases? Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, for the family relationship, it's big in traditional Chinese, and mu, like a mother and kids. That, for example, the amount make the one word good. It's left side is it's female, 女 啊. For example, we like that how is we have kids, like you have one boy, one girl, that's good. Also, among inspiration, yeah, 女 could be a mother, and another side is which is son. It could be, it's good too. Yeah, we practice use more, especially lots. Basically, like don't forget, for example, you dig down the well, don't forget who dig down the well for you. You drink water. So it's a lot. Basically, it's connected to Jason, the source.
Thank you. So next we're going to take the question. This came up in many different comments. Is this melancholic, or is this a combination of melancholy and aspiration in one? What is the tone that you see throughout this poem? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like. Phil, what do you think?
Well, I have two things to say. First of all, maybe we should object to the question itself. I mean, not this question, the last question. Actually, maybe all questions, because I'm not objecting to the content. I'm objecting to the form, because a question produces an objectification in the answer. And I want to remind you of the second line in the first poem. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. So therefore, we have fallen into the habit of doing the exact same thing that he warned us against. We want to objectify it and give it an answer. And that's why I think maybe a synthesis that produces another possibility is the correct answer, because it's actually, in a way, taking it as a question to answer another question. That's what I'm driving at, and I just want to say that first. Sure. And then I'll get to Aman's question thing. I like this question because I was thinking about the harmony.
No, let me quickly respond to just that one. I do think my response to that is that what we are producing here is 10,000 things using names. What we are this is not Dao. This is producing of 10,000 things, and each of us has to go back to the Dao, ignoring all the 10,000 things. But the only way to generate 10,000 things is using names.
Yeah,
we are all talking. Yeah.
But the way to generate the 10,000 thing is to produce the 10,001 thing.
Okay.
So therefore, that's what I'm saying, a synthesis.
Sure.
You are moving to a 10,001 thing manifestation. That's why I like the thing about, is it about melancholy, or is it about what is it? Solitude.
Aspiration, yeah.
aspiration. I rather call it solitude. I think that's wonderful because it actually is an attempt to produce a synthesis, because Armand said maybe there's some combination between the two. And in some sense, I think that's what modern new music is. To find harmony in the atonality. I mean, it's like, because that produces the next step, a possibility. It's not answering the question, but it's producing an unfolding of the question into another manifestation.
Thank you.
And so
Thank you.
maybe it's asking us to, in a sense, contemplate new possibilities rather than answering the question.
Thank you, Phil. Phil, we have got many questions, so let's keep our answers short so we can. And there are all these people who want to contribute all of these things, and there are so many questions. So let's keep our answers short so we can get to as many different viewpoints as we possibly can. Next up is going to be Kate, Jason, Judith, and Laura. Kate.
So I don't think he is telling us that we shouldn't use words, and I don't think he is.
No, sorry.
Melancholy either.
We got off the chat. We're just talking about melancholy. Is the tone melancholy, or is it aspirational, or both? What is going on?
So what I'm saying is, I don't think it has a mood. I think it's more of a state of observation, and he's describing how he is. He's not prescribing or feeling. I don't think he's, yeah. So I would say neither and both.
Wonderful. Jason.
Yeah, I just want to strongly against whoever said melancholy. Okay, so I think he is talking about, I think confession, when I say confession, I talk about in the St. Augustine style of confession. How do you feel? Okay, so in a way, he is, just like Kate said, he is not giving prescription, he is describing, okay, his situation now, okay, that's I'm feeling, just like I always feel. And I think a lot of translation, I believe they mislead it because the first sentence is teaching. So you want to make the whole thing make sense. Then, the whole thing just mess up. So if you put the first sentence to the last chapter, it fit very well as a conclusion for the last chapter. And this one just a pure confession. So I think the first line really mess up a lot of translation. So
I agree with you. I see no trace of melancholy in this poem at all. I see it as simply saying that all of this culture thing that other people are focused on is, I don't have it. And then it's kind of, you're going back to your core and you're building up. So I see a tremendous sense of joy of kind of going back to the source and growing from there. So it is kind of a coy way of saying, I don't have this and I don't have that. So it's being coy. I don't sense any melancholy in this. Next up is going to be Judith, Laura, and Madeline. Judith.
Yeah, I don't see melancholy either. But I have to say, when I first read it, I did see melancholy, but I think that's the Western thinking with the kinds of words. But if you really look at it, there isn't emotion here, like joy or melancholy. It's sort of like very observational, it's just looking at it. And I think it's just having us look for a moment, at what's very glitzy out there, and just he's contrasting to step back and say, but here I am not absorbed and not drawn into that, at least at that moment, like able to put those things in perspective of whatever else goes on. Like I can see that for what it is.
Thank you, Judith. Laura, what about you? Do you see a melancholy here?
I see no melancholy in this. I see somebody who's talking matter of fact about situation. But I also see something that in a way he says, touche, because look, here's my life. I've given up so many things that, I look at your life, I look at my life. I don't need those things in my life. I have something far superior than you do. I have nature, I have mother, and, my life is far better than yours, in fact. And so he's basically putting them down more than being melancholy. I think he's being superior in the end.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Madeline.
I think I do sense melancholy in here. I think it's partly just sheer biology, that there is safety in numbers. And when you feel detached from the rest of the herd, even internally, you have a moment of fear. And so the end of the poem is saying, here's the antidote to that fear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's also, the chapter, it kind of takes place in two different kinds of time. One is the one that Aman had linked together earlier of melancholy with aspiration, which is kind of an enduring time. And then the type of engagement with the world that Judith had talked about earlier. I think even the busiest person who is most involved in the world and the most S-oriented person must have moments when they say to themselves, oh God, what is it all for? This is so pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it also speaks to that moment when you feel that, even if it passes, that everyone can relate to this poem.
Thank you, Madeline. Aman, what do you think about melancholy and aspiration in this?
I think I'm loving the answers to my question because they're, as Phil already pointed out once, they're putting a lot of words around something that is left in attention. And I think that's the beauty of this poem as much as any, is that it does cast, in being a self-reflection, it creates a reflection for the reader. And I think I posted in the chat, perhaps if there's melancholy there, it's because we're bringing it there. We would view being alone, being removed, being dull, being at a loss as negative things. And so that comes with us. But all the I alone am, I alone do, I alone, there's something braggadocious about that. That's absolutely true. But it's also where I think there's the aspirational. If Jason's take on this as a confession is correct, then there's almost a pep talk quality, convincing yourself, telling yourself, I'm happy with being alone. I'm happy feeding at my mother and not needing these other trappings of life. And so depending on where we are in our lives, I think we can bring something very different to this reading, but it reflects back whatever it is that you're bringing to it almost immediately. And I think that's pretty remarkable. This one is a masterstroke. It's also damn difficult to translate.
That's great observation, Aman. I mean, I just want to make a general observation here about the general pattern that you mentioned. And this is what I love about these particular meetups, because it's kind of, we are all holding this mirror of this poem in front of us. And absolutely, it is metaphors. It is metaphors, and it is kind of vague and suggestive, deeply suggestive. So everybody is bringing actually a lot of what they think about philosophy, about metaphysics, about epistemology, about being human to each of these poems. So each reflection is actually a reflection on the poem and of the perspective that is being brought. And that is what is magical about this discussion, because I think that's a very lovely way of exploring the poem. I'm sure if I were to read the same, when I read the same poem at different times, I have different reactions to it. And certainly, you know, over like decades, I'm sure that it will, you know, people will have different reactions. And what we are doing here is that we are letting everybody kind of express what they are getting from it and just listening. So I agree with you that, you know, listening to all these answers is a tremendously enriching experience. Next up is going to be Jason, Kevin, and Phil. Jason.
One thing I would suggest is when you read this one, we'll probably go back to the chapter 9. Okay, chapter 9 talking about, if you remember, talking about like the bowl cannot be full, you know, and it will overspill, you know, all this time. Then the last sentence talk about retire before going too far. Okay, so this one is he already retired, and that's describing his life. So if you connect them together, and then that would be the continuous reading. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Next up is Kevin, followed by Phil. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I would follow with Aman about I'm happy. If you see the beginning of this chapter, why we put this first sentence from the last chapter should be put here. The code sitting, learning, no worrying. That's mean you're happy. So you're happy because you don't care the good or evil or yes or no. So you live the life you want to. So it's no melancholy from my feeling. Not even the loads, I would say. Thank you.
Okay. Phil, you have a comment about, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment about what Aman said. Beyond the fact that a degree of ambiguity in the language itself allows a certain interpretation, even from another era, I think that's true. But I think that anytime you contemplate or confess, or I guess go into solitude about things, there's a degree of doubt that enters in your thing. And I like the idea that you put in the pep talk to convince yourself that perhaps this is also maybe a rationalization. So in some sense, and what makes it interesting and good, and I think this is what makes it good, if you're never certain about the manifestation, because the manifestation is only a reflection of the Tao, not the Tao itself, you are never certain. So as a human being, you are asked to make decisions, and that if that decision does not produce a degree of ambiguity and uncertainty, then you are actually not doing your job. Because it's easy to say, well, I know exactly what it is, which either you're fooling yourself or you're God. So I think that actually is a charge on your humanity as a person who has to make decisions based on the fact that there is a degree of uncertainty even about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Folks, so the next bunch of questions I'm going to take are actually general questions about using this approach to life. So let's say these 3 questions. What are the challenges of living this way? What price do you pay for living this way? How do you live the Tao? Does your interpretation of what you're reading change week to week? So this is about just approaching the Tao. So I want to focus on the last 2, what price do you pay and what are the challenges of living this way? So any thoughts at this level? Aman.
It's much easier to be a monk on a mountain than it is in the city. You have to make trade-offs. If you are committing to yourself fully, this reclusion that it calls for is almost unavoidable. You'll find yourself withdrawing more and more from the world around you, which is why that retreat into hermitage and solitude is so alluring to so many Taoists the world over. It's much harder to be quote unquote faithful to this and still be enmeshed in the goings on of culture and civilization and those around you. But that almost makes it the more, I don't want to say worthwhile challenge, but it's almost easier to convince yourself that you're living in nature when all you see are trees, brooks, clouds, sand, fire, plants, than it is to stand in the middle of the city and think to yourself, oh, this too is nature. This is just also our nature. And that's a harder one to navigate. The costs can be huge depending on which way you go, but they also are, the nice thing with this is that they're paid in installments. It's not all up front. You pay as you go, as much as you want. It's like a good coffee table book. You pick it up, you read a little, you set it back down, and you're not obliged to go at it like you're training for the Olympics.
Aman, that was wonderful. So I want to expand on that and ask that as a question. All of us actually are living in the cities. We are using Zoom. All of this is technology. All of this is culture. And there is a temptation. I mean, as you were saying, there is a temptation of withdrawing into nature and trying to live in nature and kind of staying away from others, from culture, from names, from things, in order to get back to this. So let me put it, all of us actually are living in the culture. So let's form the question of how do you do this in the middle of the culture? How do you continue to use names, continue to use things like our computers and Zoom, continue to talk to each other using words, reading these poems? How do we continue to do that and remain close to nature, to the Tao, to our own core? What is involved in doing that? So we'll start with Aman, Judith, and Kevin. Aman.
I just want to say not the answer, but an answer, is to remember that most of our lives come with off switches, including our phones, our computers, our televisions, our tablets. We own them. They don't have to own us. And they only exist if we feed them. You can unplug and it will die. And if you are living at the beck and call of how many bars you have left, then it's consuming you more than you're consuming it.
Wonderfully put. We turn on, I mean, I heard yesterday, a friend of mine was saying that his child took up a pen and said, is this on? And so the idea of, that you turn things on. Next up is going to be, so Judith, followed by Kevin. Judith.
Yeah, I don't see this as prescriptive at all. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm going to read chapter 20 and this is now I have to become a hermit, or, that would be following the Tao somehow. I think that our live, and, if you think this was written before cell phones and all of that. So it clearly, this idea of stepping back from action and busyness and all of that preoccupies us is kind of essential. And that I see that's what this does. The entire book really is what is happening here, because it's like you need to drink water every day. You kind of need to hear this regularly so that you can make that space for yourself on a daily basis, not up in the mountains, but just that space. That's why people meditate. That's why they pray. And I just think it's a necessary ingredient. And that's what all of these get at in one way or another.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's another, I think, very crucial point. And the point of meditation, for example, is exactly that. And I grew up in, unfortunately, I grew up in the Indian tradition where meditation is very big. And So that, once you get used to it, it's a way of within few seconds kind of going back to your core. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but you have the ability of going through your core. You always have it. You always have your core with you. And so it's a choice of keeping on doing that. Next up is going to be Kevin, Marco, and Phil. Kevin.
Yeah, for me, it's about the choice and balance. Let's say we live in city, when we make a decision, consider, let's say, walk to the nature, close to the beach, think about, evaluate our core value, then decide again. And then when we decide if something good, we cost in the economic good opportunity cost. Another side, it could be we lost. We work hard, it could be your house got hurt. So yin and yang need a balance and harmony. That's the keyword for yourself.
Thank you. I think that's one of the reasons that Dao De Jing, even more than Confucius, is valuable to the West, because West is actually way out there in terms of using names, using things, doing all of that as being far more dominant. I mean, India is not that much. China is not that much. So this is genuinely new thing to the Western culture. In some ways, there are parts of Western tradition, like some parts of religion, which have been doing that. But in general, when you look at Western corpus as a whole, the Western way of thinking as a whole, this idea, I think, has a lot to offer. Next up is Marco.
I guess it's also like a mindset as well, sort of like this, this sort of like, even if you're in the mix, you could still be like mentally detached or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Madeline, would you like to speak out your comment?
Oh, yes, actually, it's rather in tune with what Marco just said. That for some people, it comes more naturally to feel detached all the time, and they have to work to engage with others in the human world, like say, so to behave as if they were in a city, even if they're out in a rural area and have few neighbors. Whatever it is, it may be to some extent just due to temperament, that for some people it's hard to detach and easy to engage.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Phil.
Yeah, I believe the division between nature and culture is maybe a false division, because the Tao penetrates all things and it manifests itself both in nature as well as in culture. Maybe you could think that culture is a slightly more complex manifestation because it's maybe a second order manifestation. But you could still, the way to judge it is whether that manifestation, because it's more complicated, whether it's out of tune with the Tao or not. And so therefore, you always sort of judge that, not by exactly what it says even, because you could be wrong. You could always understand the tune, but even the tune itself could change. So you have to also be complex enough, particularly in a second order nature, second order manifestation. You have to also be able to adjust to the new harmony that might exist rather than stick to the old harmony, because the nature, the Tao itself, it is manifestation, it's always transformative to a degree. So you also can't stick to that way. But I also think that particularly in culture, you have to live actually a slightly more heroic life, because you have to understand that you will fall into disharmony with the cacophony that it produces, and so that you will suffer the slings and arrows, and you must be able to stand up to it and not be displaced by it. You don't have to get into a discord fight, but you could just like stay away from it. So that's what I believe.
Thank you, Phil. Laura, what do you think?
I mean, somewhere in here, maybe there's a place that about humanity is missing, especially now in our culture, where this technology takes away our sense of humanity, you know? And I think we need to kind of build that in to what we're talking about these days, because I think we're losing that. And I think humanity is somewhere before nature, given, you know, the kind of description that he has, sort of separating from and going to mother to get nature. But I think in some place we have to build in humanity. That's all. And I don't know how or where, but I just think we're missing that.
Thank you. All right, folks. This has been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And I think this format of doing just the reading first, then everybody's takes on it, and then the questions, I think allows for far more deeper kind of exploration. And I'm going to use that going forward, even if it means that we can just do one per one chapter per meetup. So thank you very much, everybody. And Judith agrees. What about others? What do you think? Just go ahead and type in the in the chat. This is good. Okay. All right. Wonderful. All right, folks. Thank you very much, and we will see you soon. Good night, everybody. Good night.
And you just have to start at 6.
Good night. Bye.